Most language learners will never become fluent. You're wasting your time. Why? Because you're doing all the wrong things. I'll show you what works and why it's way faster than what you're doing. My name is Mikel Tellería and I'm a hyperpolyglot. I speak 12 languages and I developed a fast and efficient language learning system at the Innovation Center of the University of Deusto, here in San Sebastian. I've helped thousands of people learn languages much faster without wasting time. Most people are wasting the time, including you, probably. If you've been trying to learn a language for months and months and months or even years and you're still not able to have a proper conversation, you've been wasting your time watching YouTube videos, comprehensible input, Duolingo, all that nonsense. That's why you're stuck, because you're wasting your time with all that kind of nonsense. You need to focus on what's important. And what's actually important? Learning a lot of words, practicing a lot of speaking, doing a lot of listening. That's it. First, you need to know a lot of words, because if you don't know the words, you don't understand what you are reading, listening, watching, and obviously you can't speak either because you don't know what to say, right? So you need to learn more words and you need to learn them fast. Forget about learning grammar. You don't need to study grammar. You can learn that in context. Comprehensible input is actually good for that, but not for learning vocabulary. It's extremely slow for that. The problem is that most people try to learn vocabulary the wrong way. You learn vocabulary and then you understand the input and you review the vocabulary through input. If you want to learn all vocabulary through input, you're going to need a decade of daily input for hours and hours. And unless you're chronically unemployed, you don't have the time for that. Now, you need something that works faster to solve the vocabulary problem. Actually, vocabulary is not the problem, lack of vocabulary is the problem. And again, don't talk to me about immersion, learning like a child, or any of that nonsense. None of that works, at least anytime soon. You need to learn more words and you need to learn them faster. So this is what you do. You take the most common 1,000 words and you learn them. Then you take the 2,000 most common words and you learn them. Then you take the 3,000 most common words and you also learn them. And you keep doing that until you know 10,000 words. How do you learn the most common 1,000 words? First of all, which ones are the most common 1,000 words? Because the most common 1,000 words in the language in general, statistically, are probably not your most common 1,000 words, because you don't speak like the average person, unless you're ChatGPT. And you could learn the most common 1,000 words, but it's better to learn your most common 1,000 words. And that's why you should use language islands. Write down everything you want to say in every single situation, conversation, interaction, a list of every single sentence you want to be able to say. That's the vocab that's the most important for you. So your 1,000 most common words won't be the same as my 1,000 common words and someone else's 1,000 most common words. There will be some overlap, obviously, but the words you need to learn will depend on what you normally talk about. So you get that list of words, you order it alphabetically, so you see words next to other words that are similar to them because they start with the same letter, and you learn them. And you learn them using mnemonic associations and then reviewing your language islands over and over. If you've got a couple of thousand sentences of language islands, that's probably 2,000 or 3,000 words, individual words. You can learn those in a matter of weeks. And that will be enough to understand 80% of the language, probably more like 85–90% of the language. You can get there simply learning your own sentences. You memorize the vocabulary with associations, review with a lot of reading and listening to the sentences that contain that vocabulary. Your own sentences, which are also not only example sentences for the vocab, but also sentences that you want to be able to say. Once you've done that, you can jump straight into interesting real-world content by native speakers for native speakers. You don't have to waste time with comprehensible input channels, 10,000 hours of watching whatever Spanish videos, all that nonsense. No, you work really hard on learning your language island sentences, several thousand sentences that are practical, useful, and common. You learn the most common words, 2,000 or 3,000 words, and after that you jump straight to interesting content. Whatever topics you're into, fitness, business, psychology, travel, chess, whatever. You find podcasts, you find YouTube channels, and you start watching and you start listening to them. And what about the vocab that is there that you haven't learned yet? The remaining 10 to 15%, maybe 20% of vocab in that content that you don't know. Well, you simply take a transcript of the content, you get the vocab list of that transcript, you review it, and you memorize the unknown words with mnemonic associations. And you do this before you watch or listen to the content, so that when you're watching or listening to it, you do it right after memorizing the unknown words. That's how you develop your ability to understand a language fast. No wasting time with nonsense. When you start learning like that, you learn to speak a language fluently, several languages fluently if you want, but until then, you will continue to fail. So the choice is yours. Do you want to continue wasting your time with Duolingo and comprehensible input channels and all of that nonsense, or you want to work hard and get results now? If you're the type of person who likes results, then you should probably try my system. There's a link in the description to try my 7-day challenge to learn 150 sentences for conversation in a week. It's free, so give it a shot.